of the economy and society to government, and government
the dominant over the last 12 months, the dominant narrative has been that there was no alternative to the lockdown and the restrictions, which, you know, the latest lockdown is the longest we've had so far. There's no alternative. I mean, do you think there was an alternative, or there is an alternative?
Of course there was an alternative, and there still is an alternative. You know, to take a sledgehammer out like this and, you know, let's crush the virus. The problem with crushing the virus like that is that we're all underneath when the hammer comes down. So you don't just crush the virus, but you crush everything else. You crush society, you crush the economy, you crush people's lives.
Well, Pat, not everyone gets crushed, because the people making the decisions, they're getting a pay rise this year.
No, but Nick, have you not heard? We're all in this together, aren't we?
Oh, right, of course, yeah.
You know, so of course we're all in this together, and you know, it doesn't affect the people who are making the decisions. They haven't taken any pay cuts. It doesn't affect big tech and big pharma because and big financial, because they haven't taken pay cuts either. No, the only people that affects are the backbone of this economy, which is the small to medium-sized enterprises, the people trying to run their businesses on the high street. They're the people who have been absolutely decimated. And yet that is the section that provides the most employment in this economy. And people, and politicians particularly, tend to forget that. And they're actually quite cavalier about it.
We're doing a survey in our next issue of Business Plus about talking to accountants, and you know, we asked them that question: Did the government get the balance right between trying to suppress the virus and supporting business and enterprise and employment? And funnily enough, most of them say that, yeah, they did. If you count in all the supports, etc., like in fairness, the supports have been substantial. You know, all from the PUP to the EWSS, CRSS, all that. But you don't think supports are enough?
I don't think supports are enough, no, because again, it's going back to the tap analysis. You can't just turn something off and then expect to be able to turn it back on again. The market will not be there when you try to turn a lot of these businesses back on. And I don't think the supports compensate. But it's not just about business. It's about the effect on society. It's about the effect on mental health. It's about the escalation in suicides. It's about the next wave that's coming. And I'm not talking about the virus. The next wave that's coming are all of the invisible things that are actually going on right now that are not manifest yet, but they will be very, very soon. And that is, you know, excess mortality due to neglect of serious underlying conditions, mental health that will go on for issues that will go on for a long time to come, an unforeseen and yet unknown damage and scale of damage to our children and our youth through all of this as well with lockdown. And of course, there were alternatives. You know, we all know in business and in life, risk is there to be mitigated. It is not there to be eliminated. You can't eliminate risk. You mitigate it. You do your best. You learn to live with threats and you adapt. And of course, there was a better way, and still is a better way. And that better way is rapid antigen testing. And rapid antigen testing has been around
this is something. Sorry, Pat. This is something you're kind of strong on. It's just to explain to the audience that, you know, the dominant COVID testing method in Ireland is what they call PCR testing, which is what they call the gold standard. And then the other alternative is a much cheaper antigen. But one of the things that amuses me, Pat, is that you have this PCR gold standard, and yet someone comes into the country with say, oh, here's my PCR test, I don't have COVID. And they tell you, oh, well, we don't care. Off you go now to quarantine or isolate for 14 days. What's that about?
It's complete bullshit, actually. The quarantine in particular is complete bullshit. PCR is a very highly sensitive test that, by its designer, Kelly Murris, who died in 2019, has said many times in his life that this should never be used as a diagnostic tool, but yet we have adapted this as a diagnostic tool. And it was manipulated by a guy called Christian Drosten in Berlin, and he basically took a take on PCR and said this can become a diagnostic tool. With unseemly haste, it was adopted 24 hours later by the WHO and announced as the gold standard for testing, and it went global. And it has made a lot of money for people in laboratories doing PCR tests. The problem with PCR is that it's highly sensitive, and it picks up all kinds of viral fragments. You can test positive on a PCR, even though you've previously had COVID or you've had a related coronavirus infection. It doesn't necessarily mean you're infectious, but it will tell you if you have viral fragments.
As I understand, I would say antigen testing. Someone could turn up at the airport, actually, half an hour before getting on the plane, and in that, do the antigen test, and you don't have COVID. In that way, it's actually a much safer way of testing, really, for travel.
Yeah, antigen testing tells you if you're infectious. It's as simple as that. Am I infectious? Yes, no. It's very binary. And it doesn't last forever. You're probably good for the next 24 to 48 hours. Then do another one. I mean, antigen testing should have been brought in right across the country. It should have become like brushing your teeth, except the good news is you only have to do it about 3 times a week. But what we needed to do is identify who's infectious, not to...
but at the moment, Pat, even in the schools arena where they're suggesting perhaps, like they're doing in the UK now, test the pupils, test the teachers. You can't do it with PCR. You can do it with antigen, and yet NPHET is still saying, no, that's not good enough for Ireland,
Yeah, they've been very, very slow. And I'm deeply skeptical about this, because I think that one of the great weapons that NPHET have used has been fear and scaremongering to get people, government first, and then people to toe the party line. So the PCR positives that they produce, not necessarily infectious cases, quite a high level of false positives in there from PCR. But that's the terror that George Lee reads out on RTE at 6:01 every evening to keep us all in our place. Yeah. And they're defined as cases of COVID, which of course they're not cases of COVID necessarily. They're people who tested positive on PCR. Much better if we know who's infectious. Much better if people are actually trusted. I mean, there's a novelty. How about trusting the people instead of acting like a nanny state with people? Trust people to be responsible and to embrace antigen testing. Antigen testing is so cheap that the state could have made it freely available, and I mean free, to every household in the country. And it should become part of what we do every week. We test ourselves every few days with antigen testing to identify who's infectious, and we then take the appropriate measures and we isolate. And that is a way of getting us back to some kind of normality a hell of a lot quicker while we're waiting for vaccination, but not until all vaccination is finished. We should be doing this in parallel. Well, we should have been doing this months ago.
Just on the vaccinations, Pat, I was just working out, there's just on 300,000 people vaccinated as of today. Yeah. There's another 220,000 who actually had COVID. So in the population, you could say there's 500,000 who are COVID in some way. The over 80s who are, make up, what's the over 80s? They make up 2/3 of all the deaths. They're all going to be done. Yeah. They're all going to be vaccinated by the end of April, it looks like now. So, at that stage, when the most high risk cohort of the population of dying from COVID is actually now safe from COVID, what is the rationale for further restrictions on society?
Well, there isn't any, and add into that mix as well the fact that and this is not me saying this, but this is medical scientists saying this, and very reputable medical scientists saying this, that this is a seasonal virus. We're coming into the non-transmissible season, the late spring, early summer season, where this does not transmit. And that's another reason why, another argument as to why we can start to open up society. I'm not talking about being reckless. I'm not talking about, you give it a lash and open everything up. I'm saying that let's do a controlled and phased opening.
Well, that's I mean, the government is, saying we are going to have a controlled and phased opening. But the main thing, Pat, they seem to have their focus on all the time isn't so much the cases, but the hospitalizations. So, even though people say the vast majority of people under 65 don't die from COVID, it's very, very small proportion. But I was looking at some stats there from November into February. If you take the people who were hospitalized, 45% of them were aged under 65. So it seems that, I'm just wondering, is it really the Department of Health making life easy for the hospitals by trying to keep everyone who's going to go into hospital with COVID, but they're going to go out again, but they just hate treating COVID. And so therefore we're going to lock down society so we don't have to treat COVID.
Yeah, I think, my heart goes out to the people who are working in the hospitals, and they have had it and are continuing to have a torrid time, and they are wonderful and they're professional, and they're they're absolutely under-resourced, and the number of ICU beds we have for a population of nearly 5 million people at 280 ICU beds is pathetically small. Back in 2009, it was identified we needed 570 or 580 beds, and yet here we are in 2021, and we only have 280, and that's after adding an extra 34 or 35 beds in the last few months.
Yeah, and if you can't, so, I mean, if you can't sorry to interrupt there, just looking at, you know, the working out the difference between the excessive government spending in the last, say, 4 or 5 months and under tax shortfalls, it's working out about 300 million a week. Every week is you know, undershooting by 300 million a week. Now, how many ICU beds should you be able to build with 300 million a week?
Yeah, well, quite a lot. I know that the HSE will come on and then say straight away, you know, if we were on RTE now, they'd be on the flash and they'd be saying, yeah, but it's not just the beds, but it's the staff. Of course, it's the staff and the skilled resources, and it takes time to train people and so on. Accepting all of that. But we knew about this problem for the last number of years before the pandemic ever came. Every single winter, we're under pressure. Yeah. In January of last year, and it was on the front of the Irish Times, there were 3,142 people waiting for beds in our hospitals. This is before the pandemic, January 2020. And there were 760 people on trolleys in the third week of January.
Yeah.
Every year we have a problem. This year, it's you know, the last year it's been COVID, and you know, NPHET moved, really Department of Health moved to cover up for the inadequacies in the management over years of the public health service.
They say they're now they've learned their lesson. They're going to start building more or adding more beds. I mean, but it is a very, very gradual process. And in the meantime, there are 480,000 people this week receiving the pandemic unemployment payment because they can't work.
Yes, and lockdown destroys lives. That's the basic fact. Lockdown destroys lives. It doesn't work. It does not work. And the cost of lockdown is not worth it. And just because we can't see the damage doesn't mean the damage is not there. There was never a cost-benefit analysis undertaken by government before they went into lockdown. There was no science applied to going into lockdown. Lockdown is an import.
Well, it's not, Pat, it's not just an Irish thing, though. Like, you know, the response here has been mirrored like all over the world. Let's face it.
No, not in Sweden.
Okay.
Not in Sweden.
Yeah. Well,
not in Florida. Not in South Dakota. And we read, you know, yesterday we see that Texas have decided that's it. Mississippi
said you can trade from next week,
that's it.
Yeah.
They've had it. They've had enough. They're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So, you know, lockdown is not a proven scientific remedy. Lockdown buys you time to protect your health service, but the damage that lockdown actually does, and the removal of freedoms and civil liberties, is nothing short of absolutely catastrophic. And there hasn't even been a whimper about it, right? Not just in Ireland, but right across Europe, particularly. You know, the freedoms that have been taken away from people overnight is truly shocking.
Let's move on to another topic, which is of interest for everyone coming up to the summer, is vaccine passports. So, as I said to you, 300,000 people vaccinated, though I was working it out that the bad news is at the current rate of vaccination, it'll take another 10 weeks, that is into mid-May, to get just the over 65s done. And at the current rate of vaccination, it will take until the start of December for everyone over 45 to get vaccinated. So if you're under 45, forget it, you're not going to get vaccination until 2022 at the current rate of vaccination. But anyway, once someone has a vaccine pass, should they be able to rock up to the airport without getting fined $2,000 and fly away?
Yes, I think that, I mean, if I'd had COVID, and thank God I haven't had it, and I don't want to get it, I don't wish it on anybody, but if I'd had COVID, I would feel very aggrieved if I was been stopped from going somewhere because, you know, I'm a risk. I'm not a risk. I have immunity if I've had COVID. Similarly, if I have the vaccine, okay, they still haven't confirmed, the scientists have not confirmed whether if you have the vaccine that you still can't transmit. But I mean, common sense would say that, you know, you have to have the risk of transmission. seriously reduced. Certainly the impact on you if you get COVID, if you have the vaccine, is certainly diminished. So you're not going to, they're going to have to answer that one. If I'm vaccinated, can I still transmit or not? And so far, Big Pharma hasn't answered that question. We don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So,
but if, say, you're vaccinated, Pat, and you have, say, a PCR test, and you also have an antigen test, so you're kind of trying to prove as much as you can. Look, I'm vaccinated. I'm not transmitting. Please let me fly away.
Yeah, I think it comes back to rapid antigen testing and frequent antigen testing. And it's not beyond the wit of man to develop, simple app that says, I'm antigen free today. I've arrived in your country. I must go to a pharmacist to update. If I don't update my app, by doing a test with a pharmacist in the country I've got to within the prescribed time, there's an alert. It's that simple. This is not rocket science.
But is that the future of travel, you think, in 2022, 2023, that these are things we're just going to have to get into our heads and get used to?
It may be, but I think that, but doing rapid antigen testing compared to, 14-day quarantines, self-isolation because you might have been in close contact with somebody who has a PCR positive, taking yourself out of circulation, that's all nonsense. So, if I had the choice and I have to, do a couple of 2 or 3 antigen tests a week, and I've got freedom of movement, I'll do the 2 or 3 antigen tests a week, because that's semi-normal. The other thing is draconian, locking people down. It's crude. It's a blunt instrument. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Why do you think that the reaction, not just in Ireland, but all over the world, has been relatively docile? I mean, we saw a kind of a flare-up at the weekend in Dublin. It wasn't more than that, but generally people have been very passive about it. And even though they might have misgivings about this and that, is it because everyone's so at heart altruistic and really cares about old people and saving lives?
I think that there's a very hard conversation that people aren't prepared to have. I think that we have become very, very politically correct in society generally, not just in this country, but in many countries. And we're not, we've become extremely passive in questioning authority. We sort of become very accepting of directives that are handed down. And common sense seems to have almost been suspended. And it's very difficult. I try to understand it myself. I find it extremely difficult to understand. And I find it very difficult that when you talk out about it, and I have absolutely no doubt that there will be people who will listen to this who don't agree with me, of course, and they're perfectly entitled to their views. But equally, if this was on RTE right now, there would be absolute howls of protest from being irresponsible. The government narrative on things. So we're very passive and we're very sheep-like, and we just seem to accept what we're told, and we question nothing. And there has been very little, if any, scientific evidence produced to justify lockdown. Yeah. And there's certainly been no evidence, no analysis done of the damage that lockdown is going to cause, is causing, and will cause, and we will be reaping that legacy for years to come.
What about we'll let you go soon now, Pat. What about in your own business? I mean, when do you expect your jets to be in the air again? Is the attitude towards reopening society any more positive in Scandinavia or Spain or other markets that you have your eye on?
I think it is. I definitely think it is. Yeah, I mean, we have a few jets flying, only a handful, but we do expect that we will be back up to reasonable production by June, July. We see quite a big opening by then, and we hope that airlines will start to keep stuff on sale, build confidence in the traveling public that things are going to be better by that time frame. I think that vaccination is key. If we look at Sweden, Sweden claim that they have reached 45% herd immunity in the Stockholm region and 40% throughout the country, and that's ahead of the vaccines. And they had no lockdown. They had sensible measures like social distancing, They had no masks except in rush hour, and they have laterally brought in, an early closing of, I think, 8 o'clock in the evening of restaurants and bars, but sensible approach from day one of 4 to a table, don't congregate at a bar, but they kept things going, and Sweden has come through this extremely well. So I think, yeah, there will be an opening. I think.
And would you think will the Swedes, Pat, will the Swedes then be allowed to fly down to Greece in June and July while we're stuck at home here?
Probably, yeah, probably, and I think the Brits will all be going to Spain and Portugal, because Spain and Portugal, their economies can't suffer another lost summer, and I think they're happy to accept, a vaccinated people as their influx from the UK. So I think that we're going to find corridors like that are going to open up, and I think that we've had the longest lockdown in Europe by a country mile. We continue to be. I don't know if it's a hang up because we don't win Eurovision anymore. We want to win. We want to be the best in Europe.
Well, actually, Eurovision is actually taking place live. I was reading last night. They're actually not doing it virtually. So that's the Netherlands in May. So they're opening up a bit there too, by the looks of things.
Well, we always want to be top of the charts in Europe and everything that we do. I don't want to be cynical, but I find it very difficult not to be cynical. I mean, I think that we will be paddy last coming out of this in Ireland. I think that we are way too conservative. We don't question, and our government does not question effort. And we saw when Leo had his outburst on the Claire Byrne show, where that got us. Didn't get us very far. Neffet still dominate and still direct. They're unelected. People forget that they're unelected. They're really a government department that's unelected, but they are running the show. Sadly, they're running the show.
Tell you what, Pat, maybe if you put on a charter from Belfast down to Mykonos, we'll all see you in June and July. Okay.
Absolutely. That might be the place to go. I'm looking at Greece myself. That's where I want to go in June.
Say the whole country's looking at Greece. Okay, listen, that's I think half an hour is enough of this nattering. So Pat, thanks very much for your time. It's great to hear an alternative point of view to, as you say, what we hear all the time.
Thank you, Nick.
Okay, talk to you again. Cheers. And
Bye.
Thank you everyone else
Bye.
for watching in, and hopefully see you next Wednesday as well. Cheers.